I'm proud of the fact that our family has been on this particular quarter of land since the summer of 1910. There are still a handful of ranches in our area that go back to the homesteaders, but there aren't any outside of the Native American people that are in the area that would be on that traditional ground that their ancestors were on. We're probably one of the few and the last of the people who are on the original family homesteads.
I'm Robin Bickel Hansen, and I'm the fourth generation here on the ranch, and this is my husband, Cody Hansen.
I'm Jack Bickel, but I got that nickname because I was named, my grandfather was Harry, my father was Harry, and when I was born, I was named Harry. And so with two older Harrys in the family, I got a nickname. And since my middle name was John, and I was named after two grandfathers, my grandfather Harry Bickel and my grandfather John Sears. And John Sears, at the time I was born, lived in Spearfish, South Dakota, but his family heritage were homesteaders that were in the Badlands of South Dakota. So, I feel fortunate that I come from two distinct lines of people who were homesteaders. Anyway, since I was Harry the Third, and my middle name was John, I got the nickname Jack because it's a nickname for John. This addition is on the house. My grandfather's homestead shack sat right pretty much in the center of this room. And he came out here from Pennsylvania in 1910. He was one of 13 kids. And he was what was called Pennsylvania Dutch, although he was a full-blooded German. The railroad came out to Isabel, South Dakota, and Fire Steel had a stockyards. And so from sometime in the late teens or early 20s until the late 40s, my grandfather bought horses and mules, and he shipped them back to Pennsylvania. And so he shipped approximately 16,000 horses and mules back to his brother in Raresburg, Pennsylvania, and his brother would have sales at the family farm. And he would generally ship them out a carload at a time, which depending on if they were work horses or saddle horses, it could be 20 or the most would be 40. I think generally it would take two carloads of their box cars to get 40 out. And then he shipped another 6,000 to a friend he had in North Carolina, and they liked smaller horses in the South. And so he always credited the fact that he had this other income coming in from the sale of the horses, why he didn't go broke in the 30s, when so many people who homesteaded here, if they survived the teens and the 20s, the 30s were so devastating in those drought years that if Grandpa wouldn't have had that extra income, he probably would have had to move too. So actually, the 30s were good for Grandpa because he had that source of income, and if other people couldn't pay their taxes and the county took their land for taxes, sometimes all Grandpa had to do was pay the back taxes on a quarter of land, and in a few years, he ended up getting title to it. And the people who wanted to sell out, basically there wasn't much market for the land, so he was able to accumulate land, and largely because he ended up having this source of income that most homesteaders would have never had. And then he also, for a while, raised buffalo. When you see how lucky we are to still be here, and then you know that some of these other families, for whatever reason, finally gave up and left. I think it's a tribute to the families that are still here. That they went through the good times, they've gone through the bad times. One of the things I think that I've always thought, like, okay, say we have a blizzard or we have a drought or some weather condition that makes things pretty tough. And the thing that I think we can draw strength from in our family is no matter what the weather situation is, we're not the first generation to have experienced that kind of inclement weather condition, And so the thing that I've always told my girls is we come from a long line of people who weren't easily discouraged.
Yeah.
And I really believe that, people in our family have dug deep and discovered an inner metal in themselves, that have helped them through tough times. And I think a lot of times in this era we live in now, a lot of people are used to having somebody else do something, And out here, if you're in rural America, there are so many things you have to do yourself. I mean, you rely on your neighbors. And the thing that I would tell anybody who's ranching, farming, you cannot be scared of change. The people who are not open to change are doomed to failure. No matter what your endeavor is, no matter what business you're in, if you won't change, you're doomed to fail.
My grandpa Harry got into Herefords.
Oh, my grandpa did in the teens.
Grandpa did?
Yeah.
Okay. So grandpa started with Herefords. Your dad, Grandpa Harry, continued with
Yep.
Herefords. And then you kind of thought about getting into Angus. And the kind of agreement was you could get into Angus, but Grandpa kind of said you would prefer it to be Red Angus as opposed to Black Angus. So if they were going to get out of Herefords, they started dabbling in Red Angus because it was also a really nice crossbreed between Red Angus and Hereford, because you have really nice mama cows, but you still have, moderate birth weights but a high gaining calf with Hereford Red Angus cross. And so that's kind of how it started. You bought the first Red Angus bull in what, 1979?
Yep.
Was it?
Mm-hmm. We bought the first 3 Red Angus bulls.
And we've been Red Angus ever since.
Yeah.
So now we focus on our commercial cattle herd and spend a lot of time focusing on our female program, raising good replacement heifers for the folks that buy them after we wean them off the mama cows, and then we keep replacement heifers to continue our herd. And we like to be able to market our heifer calves for folks that are looking for replacement heifers, and our steer calves tend to do pretty well putting weight on down the road. Cody brought his cows here after we got engaged, and they calved out here, and they've fit in really well with our herd. And now I don't think you can even tell. I mean, they fit in so well that you wouldn't know it if they didn't have an ear tag in their ear that said differently.
Judy and I, when she was alive, and our girls were going to college, and we discussed, we'd probably ranch for sure until we got the youngest one through college, and then, maybe we'd lease the place and consider doing something else. And I can remember when Robin was between her freshman and junior years in college down at SDSU, and we were over on the old Larson quarter, and we'd got caught up bailing that morning, and we were walking back to the pickup, and she put her arm around my shoulder, and she said, "Dad, I'm going to come home and be a rancher." So right away I knew that just ended my retirement plan.
Yeah, I really messed that up for him. And he's still here, and he's still doing chores with us every morning. I've always felt like I'm where I need to be.
Was a senior in high school, I definitely wanted to see Timberlake and Firesteel and Isabel in my rearview mirror. And then when I got a half a world away, in Southeast Asia, I knew that I was going to do anything and everything I could do to get back here, because there's no better place and no better people. There might be places that have way more trees, or they have way more rainfall, but you'll never find any better people to live among than the ones we have out here in this part of the country. Neighbors care about each other, and they do whatever they need to do to help each other. And I think we're very lucky, and to have like now I think about the grandkids that live close, and how lucky they are. They grow up working from a young age and contributing to the success of their operation, and they have something to feel proud about.
It's all part of the legacy.
But there's more acres here that look the same as they did before they were settled than many other places in the world.
Yeah, so often when we're driving around, I'll say, I wonder what was going on here 100 years ago or 120 years ago. who was chopping the creek open, or who was riding horseback to a neighbor's, or, you know, what were the homesteaders doing back then. It's pretty neat to see, because I mean, some of the landscape is still the same.
Okay, let's just say if our place was like so many of the other places and it had been sold, you know, years ago, those stories that my grandfather and my grandmother passed on to me and I try to share with my kids, they'd be lost. We wouldn't know about old Mrs. Killhawk. We wouldn't know about some of these stories. And I think that pertains to the Native Americans and the homesteaders here. You know, as long as I can pass on stories that my grandparents told me and my parents told me to Robin and her generation, my other girls and grandkids, a part of those people are still alive. They won't be forgotten.
Yeah.
But I always liked the wisdom that Grandpa shared with me, you know, and had the benefit of some of his life experiences, and you know, it's pretty nice to be able to walk across the yard and you know that you're not the first person who had either good weather or bad weather, you know, and that you're, you know, the third generation that's been here, and there's a fourth generation and a fifth generation that are in the area, you know, the 3 grandkids that live over a few miles east of us, and it's just pretty awesome.
Makes my heart so happy when the family's back, or, you know, around, and there's grandkids running around the yard, and it's like, wow, this is, you know, for over 100 years there's been Bickels running around this yard, and it's just pretty neat to be a part of. Being a caretaker of the land and your animals, you feel a pretty deep connection with God, and you know, you are doing his work through caring for the land and the animals. And I feel like it's from God's grace that we're still here and still making it work and powering through every day and just appreciating his gifts to us through what we get to do every day. My prayer is that Cody and I can continue on the ranch. I'm so grateful that we get to work alongside my dad and my Uncle Keith every day, and hopefully someday our kids get to run around in the same places that I ran around, and that little Jack ran around, and little Harry